It's actually a lie. It's like the biggest myth that we've been told is just because you age that you'll no longer be interested in sex. Near 60% of women report they take the pill for symptom management, not primarily for pregnancy prevention. I think too often women are given the pill as a way to get them out of the doctor's office. And my husband said all the symptoms back to me one morning at the breakfast table. And I was like, wait a minute.
Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Biohack-it. And since it's Women's Health Month, we're doing another episode on women's health and hormones. And today I'm very pleased to have Dr. Jolene Brighten, who I followed on a while on Instagram. And I absolutely love her content and her education to bring her on to Biohack-it. So thank you, Dr. Jolene, for coming on.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
So I'm going to give everybody a background on you and who you are and kind of the work that you've done. So you're a hormone expert, nutrition scientist, and leader in women's health and medicine. You're a board certified naturopathic endocrinologist and certified sex counselor. And I think that's so incredible. And plus a published author, and you really fight and advocate for patient rights. So I loved having you on because I was thinking about this whole world that we kind of demonize as women age. Sex kind of tends to become a taboo topic. So to bring somebody like yourself on, you're an endocrinologist, but also talking about the science of why we lose our sex drive.
Yeah, it's actually a lie. It's like the biggest myth that we've been told is just because you age that you'll no longer be interested in sex. And there is the hormonal aspect. I'm going to talk about that. But first I want to say, there's a lot that changes, especially postmenopausal, that lends itself to better sex. So we know one of the big inhibitors, one of the big things in women's mind that will keep them from getting in the mood or take them out of the mood is the perceived threat of an unintended pregnancy. When that goes out the window, there's a lot of women who find that they are more interested in sex. There's also a lot more comfort with your body. There's a lot more experience of knowing what you like. And so it really is a myth that just because women age, their sex drive declines. And in fact, your desire for sex declining can be a sign that something else is going on. The same is true for men. So anybody who's like, this has been my normal and now things have changed, we want to ask why. And it certainly can be hormones. And this is where I think people get under the assumption that, okay, you must not be interested in sex anymore as just a default of aging, because as estrogen declines, it's one of our primary hormones that not only helps with lubrication and arousal, but also our desire for sex and fantasizing about sex. In fact, when our estrogen is highest in our cycle, during the ovulatory window, or what gets called the sexual phase of a woman's cycle, we know that that's the time where most women will report the highest amount of sexual fantasies happening in their mind. So their brain is just running sex. So as we age and estrogen declines, it's certainly true that what gets deemed sexual dysfunction, which is really, yes, it can feel dysfunctional, but really it's physiological adaptations happening to the changes in the hormones. The drop in estrogen causing vaginal dryness, causing pain with sex, struggling to orgasm because of the changes happening to the tissues. And then, of course, the effects on the brain. Estrogen isn't just about sexual desire. It's also about your mood, feeling happy, feeling yourself, feeling like you're beautiful, feeling confident. So these changes can lend itself to a decline in our sexual desire. However, if your sexual desire is declining because of these hormones, so is your heart health, so is your brain health, so is your bone health. A lot of other systems are being affected. And so this is why we should never just accept, oh, you're just getting older, therefore you don't have any desire for sex, because the underlying issue can be affecting every single system in the body in a very negative and profound way.
And can we talk about because of this decline, I say, in hormones that people try to label it as, what does the role of cortisol and stress play when it comes to causing this decline?
I love that you are just going right there and making that connection. So this is such an important aspect of women's health that isn't discussed enough, in my opinion. Whether or not you want to have a baby, by way of being born with ovaries, your entire biological system is set up to survey the environment for safety. Because when it is safe, we will be fertile. And when it is not safe, we will shift out of fertility by way of maybe it being so extreme. So one of the most common things that comes to people's mind is functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. Maybe they don't know that name, but it's the athlete who overtrains, undereats, gets their body fat percentage down to like 15%, and they stop ovulating and they stop getting periods. So that's an extreme type of stress. You can even skip your period if you get in a car accident. Some people skip their period if they travel time zones because for their system, that's a big stressor. And what are they really skipping? They're skipping ovulation. Now, for a lot of people, the day-to-day stressors are not going to be that extreme for them. Instead, what it's going to look like is a shift away from progesterone production in favor of cortisol. And it's not because there's only so much of primary hormones that make these to go around. It is that the brain, being super smart, in communication with your body, says, not a good time for baby making. Shift all hands on deck to handling this stress. The problem is that in modern society, we are inundated. We have not evolved. We have an evolutionary mismatch. We have not evolved for the amount of stress. And people, who come to me, I have patients who are like, I'm not that stressed. I'm like, tell me about your sleep. How much light exposure is there? Oh, there's a lamppost outside of my bedroom. Okay, that is actually a type of stress. Tell me about your commute. Oh, I spend 2 to 3 hours in a car. Yes, hurtling a piece of metal at 70 miles per hour, which you currently have adapted to in your mind to put in the background, but that's still a stressor that your brain's perceiving. There's a lot going on in that time. So we can talk about all of the stressors that are out there, but the biggest takeaway I want people to understand is that if you are under stress, your body will be prioritizing your stress hormones over your reproductive hormones. And that can happen at any phase of our life. What I was talking about previously was menopause, which that's a normal transition for women to make. Although I will challenge the idea that it's normal for us to be making it as early as we do, given what our lifespan is. And this is where the need for bioidentical or another form of hormone replacement therapy comes in. Now, if you are in menopause, stress also matters for you because once those ovaries retire, and they absolutely do, and they will never give you another drop of hormones again when they are done, it's up to your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands are going to make DHEA. DHEA is going to get converted into testosterone and estrogen. It's going to give you a little bit, but understand your DHEA levels now are very, very low in menopause compared to what they were decades ago because it starts its decline at age 25.
This is all such incredible information because I think women are so misinformed when they go to a traditional doctor or just even talking or trying to get themselves educated. They don't know about all the spectrum of things that happen and tick away at you. And then it's kind of this kaleidoscope that kind of takes place, right? This is cascade effect that takes place on your health. And I think piecing it all together about talking about that, no, you don't need to give up your sexual desires just because you're getting old. And that's a myth that can go away. Talking about even stress and cortisol. And then also the piece about trauma. So let's say you go through a really big life trauma and stuff, obviously causes stress, but what about things like people talk about generational trauma or trauma they've carried through childhood? How does that play into things like your sexual health or your overall hormonal health?
Oh, it's everything. And I appreciate you bringing this up because this is another aspect of health, specifically women's health, that isn't discussed a lot when it comes to hormones. So you can be eating all of the right things, you could be exercising, sleeping, doing all of the right things, and still feeling like I cannot get my nervous system regulated. I can't get a handle on what's happening with my stress hormones, my cycles. I'm feeling at the mercy of them because of this trauma. So very important for people to understand that your eggs, they were in your mama's body being formed, okay? So you were pre-you, right? The prelude to you, that was in your grandmother's body. Whatever was happening for your grandmother, that imprints, and that can change your stress response drastically. So there's the allostatic load that certain individuals experience. So for example, If you're Black in the United States, that in itself lends itself to a higher allostatic load. Your threshold of stress is so much higher. But then when we start to piece out, well, what about that generational trauma? We understand that even what happened generations back can change the organism in development. So they've done, studies looking at people who have gone through extreme stress. So Holocaust, people who have gone through famines, and seen the children that are born from that. And certainly the way their nervous system interacts to the environment and the way their stress system is set up is going to be different. And I think this is important for people to understand that epigenetics, what you input, can change these things. And it isn't that your body betrayed you or that it's dysfunctional because of those events. Your body was forming. Significant stressors happen, your body set itself up to be very primed for stress. So in some instances, being very primed for stress will look like any little thing will set off your nervous system as an alarm. That's your body's way of keeping you safe. You are literally being selected for to survive. The problem is the same threats aren't there. The threats you are facing, your body doesn't know the difference. That are you skipping meals because I don't know, you have ADHD and you're like, I forgot to eat. I was having so much fun focusing on this one project. Were you skipping meals because like you're a busy mom and you're like, I just didn't have time. I grabbed my coffee, I got out the door, I got the kids to school, I needed to go to the gym, and you're feeling hangry. Your body doesn't know, is this famine or is this, just you forgetting? This is why eat less, exercise more, not the best move for women as well, because it's another stressor. So trauma aside, this is a stressor that signals to your body that the environment's not safe. And what's going to happen? Unfavorable hormonal shifts. So I want people to understand this trauma can be healed. It's the least fun part of healing, I will tell you, is everybody, we get their physical body to where it's feeling better. And that's when my patients are like, oh, I feel so much better. I'm like, and now comes the really hard part, because now that you've worked on your body enough to muster up that energy, now you got to work on the emotional body, the emotional aspect. And you can't always just start there, right? Because if you're flatline fatigued, you're feeling awful, to unload that and try to unwrap that, it's system overload. There's going to be shutdown. But it is entirely possible to heal these traumas and to understand your system and match it, meet it where it's at.
Something you said that's so wonderful, and I want to touch upon that because Biohack-it really is about the physical, emotional, and spiritual bodies, and they all have to be in line. You talked about the emotional body right now. So trauma response, sometimes like you're saying, your grandparents might have experienced the Holocaust or the famine or whatever it is. But in your mind, living in today's world, because your cells have this trauma response to them, yes, you might not be going through the Holocaust or a famine, but you will recreate stress in your life because that is what your programming has taught you is your regular baseline. And that is what essentially throws your entire body off. So the work that you do is so incredible in healing trauma because you're trying to say, no, you need to regulate your nervous system and it's okay. You are now safe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And for so many years, I think people go through life carrying all this trauma and baggage with them and they recreate it through emotional relationships or dynamics at work and they're living in that high stress response. And then you're having all of this hormonal issues that are resulting of it. You're like, but I eat well and I'm kind of getting enough sleep, but they're not paying attention to the baseline also that's the emotional body that we all carry with us.
Yes. No, that's so well said. I appreciate you just reiterating that for people.
And I was going to ask you, your own health journey, for example, you were struggling with PMS, painful periods, fatigue, anxiety. So you've really gone through all of that stuff yourself to come to a place of healing. Now, what triggered the thought in you saying, this is not normal. I should not be having this sort of PMS. I should not be having this kind of fatigue. And then what tools did you utilize to heal your body?
I have always been, since I probably before I could even verbalize it, I've been somebody who needs to know why. I need to understand why. And I am also very good at seeing the patterns, putting puzzle pieces together. And it was early in my life that I developed chronic gastritis and heartburn. And I was a child. So here I am, a child who can't eat food, who's having heartburn. My doctors are like, giving me every drug there is that, they could to try to like help and working me up for everything. And it took a very long time. It wasn't until I was 17 and they discovered I had H. pylori. And so I had a stomach infection, a bacteria that lives in the stomach that can lead to heartburn and gastritis, all of these symptoms. And at that time, I had made connections that, hey, if I eat like spaghetti and I drink orange juice and I have like a piece of French bread, that combination is making me have worse heartburn. At this point, my doctor's telling me, let's treat it. There's nothing that you can do. Like diet doesn't do everything. And it's wild that doctors still say that. And yet I put that connection together and I decided I'm not going to take a proton pump inhibitor for the rest of my life, which was their only answer. And I will work this out with diet. And that has always been a bit of my default. So here I am as a teenager being like, no, I can figure this out myself with using food. I went on to study nutrition and I was put on the pill for very heavy, very painful periods. So bleeding more than 7 days. The pain was so bad, I would vomit. I would be kept home from school. And I was told, like many of us were, that this was normal by my mom, by my aunts, by my doctor. My doctor said the only hope was the pill. So I go on the pill and I do that for a decade. And it was really when I learned, and here it is, like a decade. I don't even know how the pill works. I'm just taking it, knowing that it keeps me out of pain. Also struggling with all of the side effects from the pill, which I just laugh about because I thought my body was broken. I thought something was wrong with me all those years, just until I came off and all those issues went away. And I ultimately went off when I learned I could only get pregnant 1 day out of the month. That's it. And here I was medicating my body every single day under the guise that I could get pregnant at any point in my cycle. Any point in my cycle, I could just become pregnant. And so I decided to come off. It also, at the time when I had started the pill, they said like, basically you got 10 years on this and then you need to come off. That changed later without a whole lot of research to back up why that actually had changed, like that recommendation. So I come off, I lose my period. And then when it comes back, it's the same thing as it was when I was younger. 7-8 days of bleeding, can barely control it, super, super painful, and the worst rage symptoms. And it was after just all of my experiences in life, but also I look back to that moment when I was 17 and told my doctor, no, like I will do this with diet. That's really when I decided like I'm not going back on the pill, which is my doctor's answer. I am going to figure this out and this is not normal. And how did I know this? Because at this point I was in naturopathic medical school. It's only because I was actually becoming a doctor that I was being told that these things weren't normal. But prior to that, no one had actually talked to me about, you don't have to have PMS. You don't have to bleed that many days. Your periods don't have to suck so bad that you are scheduling your calendar to basically stay home. So I will talk specifics here in a minute, but I just want people to know this is very new for me. But fast forward a full 29 years, I believe it is, later, and I get diagnosed with endometriosis. So I was actually given the pill to cover up these symptoms, which turned out to be endometriosis. And it's sad, and there's a lot of feelings around it, but it's also kind of hilarious. I feel like the universe is Loki. If anyone knows who Loki is, he's a big jokester. And I just feel like I wrote Beyond the Pill and I wrote about the problem of giving women the pill and just covering up their symptoms because it could be something bigger. And then lo and behold, here it is. But I managed it. Nobody looked for it because once I had come off the pill, I changed my diet to increase magnesium-rich foods, to increase omega-3 fatty acids. And I was very, very good about no ultra-processed foods because I could understand that. I mean, at the point, I wasn't really eating them. But even if I was like, in college and being like, I'm just going to buy something packaged and I know it's higher in omega-6s, sure enough, I would not be feeling great. So why does this matter? I want people to understand that the number one cause of period pain in terms of from that like biochemical standpoint is prostaglandins being elevated. And those prostaglandins are hormone-like chemicals that will cause your uterus to contract. Very good when you want to expel a baby or uterine lining. So it's very good at moving things out. These prostaglandins are made from omega fatty acids. You have a higher processed food diet, you have more omega-6s coming in, they will be more potent and more painful. If you have more omega-3s coming in, you still have the prostaglandins you need, but they are less painful. So in addition to this, I absolutely took supplements. So I took omega-3 fatty acids. I usually recommend 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams of those. Magnesium, the form I prefer is glycinate. It's well absorbed. It doesn't cause diarrhea. And this is important because prostaglandins do cause diarrhea. It's why you get loose stools or even diarrhea on your period. And magnesium getting, what's really cool is that we now understand. So it was always good. Magnesium, like 150, 300 milligrams. We now understand people who are getting 550 milligrams or more. And that's not just from supplements, but also from their diet. They have a younger brain compared to their cohorts. So people of the same age, their brain looks younger. So do it for your periods, do it for your brain health. So those are two big areas that I focused on was nutrition for prostaglandins and the supplements that can help with prostaglandins. That specifically helps with the painful periods. When it comes to PMS, that's all about getting estrogen, histamine, progesterone, all in check. And we can certainly talk more about that, but I said a whole lot of things. So I want to pause and see if you have any questions.
I actually want to talk for anybody listening. They're like, hey, Dr. Jolene, you're saying 550 milligrams of magnesium. Which foods should they target? And should they target them throughout their cycle? Or is it like into cycle syncing? So different phases of the cycle, they should bring in this dosage of magnesium.
Well, what's really great about magnesium is that it is found in dark chocolate. So when you crave it in your luteal phase, of course, bring that in. Not a whole bar. You're not going to feel great especially if it's like a high sugar piece of chocolate. You're going to feel worse. In the short term, dopamine and serotonin are going to be like, you did a good job. We love you. You feel great. And then the next day, you're going to be like, what did I do? So 550 milligrams of magnesium, that is what they looked at in aging populations. The average individual, they probably do okay around 300 milligrams. But the emphasis I think we need to look at is like these studies looked at dietary magnesium for the younger brain is what foods are we getting this in? Because it's not just about one nutrient, right? I think that's where people get into a slippery slope where they chase one nutrient and don't recognize that like actually the nutrient comes bundled with all these others. So for example, avocado having magnesium, it also has vitamin B6 and vitamin B6 helps with your progesterone levels and helps with your estrogen clearance. So I love starting with food, bringing in the supplement second. Leafy green vegetables, absolutely going to be wonderful for your cycle, and looking at things like cruciferous vegetables. Now, we ideally want to eat these things every week, all the time. We want to be bringing in these foods. We want to have variety. To the notion of cycle syncing, I think where things start to go wrong is when it gets too dogmatic. It's like you're in this part of your cycle, therefore you only eat these foods or you have to eat these foods. And we need to stand back and look at like we need to be offering these nutrients all along because what you experience. So let's say you get your period tomorrow. Your period tomorrow, whatever it's like, is whatever was going on during the prior cycle. So what you are affecting in terms of your cycle, it's not going to be something as simple. So like, yes, period cramps, you can take magnesium. If you have a migraine, you can take magnesium. This will start helping immediately. If you want to not have to take something because you have symptoms, then we start it ahead of time. So I bring all of this up because I think we need to not rob women of their intuition when it comes to if you're craving something, ask yourself why it is you're craving it. So if you're craving in your luteal phase carbs, you're like, I just want to eat a whole loaf of French bread. Like, give me a baguette. I need pastries. Like it's feeling like I just want these simple carbohydrates. Okay, that's interesting. We're not going to judge you for that. Why would we be craving that? As estrogen dips, it should take a backseat to progesterone in the luteal phase, serotonin follows. And serotonin, that's part of why we feel good. It's not everything. I want people to understand that. It's just one of the many players of why we feel good. We feel happy. a boost of eating sugar, refined carbohydrates, that's going to help. So we can look at other ways of chasing serotonin, doing air quotes here, but chasing serotonin. So exercise instead. Maybe you get up and you exercise first thing in the morning. You do it outside in the sunlight, even better. But what's the other reason why we would be craving these carbohydrates? Because as you go into the luteal phase, your progesterone should be up. That's great. You're going to feel more chill, more calm. You're going to sleep better, but you're also going to be less insulin sensitive. That's normal because the body's like, there might be a potential baby that we're growing. We need to have sugar available. So at that point, you're going to crave more carbohydrates. If you're an athlete, you may require as much as 10% more calories during that part of your phase. Yeah. So it's that part of like cycle syncing that I do think we should honor, that science that we have around that unlike, going back to like just eat less and exercise, actually, you don't want to trigger that stress state in the luteal phase because that can compromise your progesterone. And if it compromises your progesterone, you're going to feel more irritable. Then you're going to have more estrogen. That can potentially cause issues with histamine, and that can make you feel really ragey. That can give you symptoms of period flu. So instead, what we want to focus on is, okay, you crave carbohydrates. What's the most nutrient-dense carbohydrates we can get? Like, this is where people talk about eating a sweet potato. Yes, love that. Maybe you do eat white potatoes, but here's the hack. You cook them and you put them in the fridge over the night, and then you put them in a salad the next day. Now we've got resistant starch, which is going to fuel your microbiome, which is what is also keeping your estrogen in check. So there is a beautiful way to harmonize and work with your cycle and respect what is going on with your cycle. But I don't think it has to be super rigid of like, we should just be eating these foods. I will say I am a fan. And since I was a resident, I was like, increase your cruciferous vegetables the week before you expect your period. That is helping with estrogen detoxification. It is supporting the microbiome. And that can be really beneficial because if we're not getting all this estrogen stimulation, periods can become lighter, they can become easier, and we can allow progesterone to really shine during that time.
May is dedicated to women's health and hormones here on Biohack-it. And you can't talk about women's health without talking about birth control. Birth control is not and should not be a one-size-fits-all solution. I think too many times we're handed a pill without knowing the side effects and what is truly best for our individual, unique, and beautiful bodies. If you want a natural, hormone-free birth control option with no side effects, I highly recommend you check out Natural Cycles, which is one of my personal favorite apps that I've been using. Natural Cycles analyzes your body's temperature to let you know if you're having a fertile or non-fertile day. You can either take your temperature when you first wake up, or you can pair it the way I do with my Oura Ring or an Apple Watch. Natural Cycles is FDA cleared, backed by science, and is the birth control method I've been using for the past year. And if you want to give Natural Cycles a try, use code BIOHACK at naturalcycles.com to get 15% off an annual subscription and a free thermometer. Natural Cycles is for 18 plus and does not protect against STIs. I think this is all such great information because I read a statistic somewhere that 86% of women use some sort of pharmacological medication, right? So they're trying to medicate themselves. So now that they can turn to cycle syncing, nutrient-dense foods, what you should be eating, certain supplementation, it's like rather than putting a bandage on something, which is essentially what a lot of traditional medicine kind of points towards, you're saying, hey, look a little deeper, figure out why you're having those cravings, look at how to nourish your body from the inside out, and therefore you won't have the after effects of this really painful period and this kind of like, almost turmoil that you go through.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And what's so interesting about that statistic is that is encompassing not just ibuprofen or Midol, but it's also encompassing the birth control pill, right? And we know that near 60% of women report they take the pill primarily for symptom management, not primarily for pregnancy prevention. And that I think we need to just pause on. Should you choose to use the pill because that's what works best for you and you just don't want to deal with changing your diet or living a different lifestyle, like you're like, I'm not in it, I just want to take the pill, that's totally your choice. And I will support that. I think, however, the problem is that too often women are given the pill as a way to get them out of the doctor's office with the doctor in there. I think most doctors are thinking, I just want them to feel better. Like, I just want them to feel better, and I know this can help. And yet it also makes it so that there's less work on the doctor's part, that to have to actually dig in and figure out what is going on. And so with that, I want people to understand, like, there's nothing wrong if you need to pop an ibuprofen, every now and again. You're like, oh gosh, like, it's happening like once a quarter. Maybe I need to have an ibuprofen. That's not the end of the world, okay? But if you are somebody who's like every single cycle, I'm taking multiple doses of an NSAID, that's going to lead to issues with your intestines. So intestinal hyperpermeability can happen. Like, that can lead to, issues of you not feeling well, having more gastrointestinal symptoms before your period. But more importantly, that's not normal. And you shouldn't have to live like that. You shouldn't have to require a medication in this instance just to get by with your period. There's lots of things that can be done. And if you haven't investigated, could this be something more? Could you be experiencing fibroids, endometriosis, adenomyosis? Like, could there be something else going on? I'd really encourage you to do that, because what often gets said about women's health is like, these are reproductive issues. In the case of endometriosis, this is a system-wide issue. This is an inflammatory condition. This is affecting your entire body. And taking an NSAID is not the answer. Taking birth control might get you out of pain, but there's more to investigate, more that can be done to support you, and you absolutely deserve that.
I was also going to ask you, a lot of people prescribe, like, let's say a certain condition I want to talk about is PCOS, because it's been on the rise and it's just becoming more and more and more per se common, but it shouldn't be. And a lot of time, a lot of traditional, gynecologists or whatever, they prescribe the pill for PCOS.
Yes.
So I want to dive in a little bit further into that, because I know a lot of there are a lot of girls who work at our company. They're like, hey, I have PCOS. I've been given the pill. So
yeah,
what are they not looking into, and what is actually the cause and not being treated?
Oh, I wish I had an answer for the cause of PCOS, but there's this problem with funding anything that has to do with ovaries in science, and it's very aggravating. And so I want people to understand, here's what's crazy about PCOS. About 1 in 10 have it, but the estimates are as high as 70% of the cases aren't diagnosed. They aren't even diagnosed. Women have to go to an average about 2 to 3 doctors before they get the diagnosis, but yet we know still about 70% of cases aren't even diagnosed. What is going on with PCOS? Here's what our current understanding is. So yes, is there anything that's not rooted in gut health? I don't know. I don't have an answer on that. I could not say, but there is something about gut dysbiosis happening with PCOS. We understand that there is insulin insensitivity or insulin dysregulation happening in roughly anywhere 60 to 70% of those with PCOS will lose sensitivity to insulin. They're cranking out more insulin. And in the polycystic ovary picture, which, by the way, they don't actually have cysts on their ovaries. They have follicles, which are trying really, really hard to ovulate. The eggs are just lining up to try to ovulate. So the name is even wrong. It's not cysts, it's follicles. It's little eggs just hoping that they'll get chosen to ovulate. And in that ovary, when insulin hits, the response is to make more androgens. So that's where we see higher testosterone levels. This is why we see hair loss on the head, unwanted hair growth on the rest of the body, irregular cycles, cystic acne. But while this may be showing up with nobody wants to lose their hair and nobody wants acne, those are the least problematic parts of PCOS. And I don't say that lightly or dismissively. I say that because with PCOS, what most women are not told is that they're at higher risk of developing diabetes. They're at higher risk of heart disease, having a cardiovascular event. They have higher levels of inflammation in many cases. We know inflammation is problematic for all kinds of things. They can be at higher risk of endometrial cancer, and by way of endometrial hyperplasia. If you don't ovulate, you don't get progesterone. If you don't get progesterone, you don't get a drop. You don't shed the lining of your uterus. That is one reason why your doctor may use the pill saying, I want to prevent endometrial cancer, because you haven't had a period in a year. And that can be very dangerous if that continues. However, the problem with the pill is, it can give you this withdrawal bleed. It's not giving you back your period. It's not fixing your period, because at the crux of PCOS is anovulation. And this is how we get to the diagnosis. We rule out everything else it could possibly be. We have anovulatory cycles, which a woman will report as irregular cycles. We have high androgens. Now that's 2 out of the 3 criteria we have to meet. The third is the polycystic ovaries. And as I already said, they're not actually cysts. The ultrasound's actually not needed. If you have those 2 symptoms, we don't actually have to do the ultrasound to confirm PCOS. We might need to do it for another reason. But what I want women to really understand is that while the pill will make you bleed, and it may be a tool you're using to prevent endometrial cancer or prevent the cystic acne, as it can in some cases, it's doing nothing to address the insulin dysregulation, the gut dysbiosis, the inflammation, or your risk for cardiovascular disease, which we know once you cross that threshold of menopause, you're at very high risk for. And so this is where I'm like, the pill is always an option, right? It's there, we can use it, but it's a huge disservice if we don't work this person up first, tell them what's going on, and give them all the information to make the best decision for their body. And in fact, the 2023 guidelines for PCOS actually have said to clinicians that nutrition and lifestyle counseling should be offered to every woman with PCOS. Why? Because it works, because it's effective, and because that is the most powerful thing that you can be doing right now to prevent chronic disease, like having diabetes or a cardiovascular event.
You know what's so amazing is hearing you speak and listening to all of this. It's just so obvious that a lot of the time when people have hormonal imbalance, especially in women, that is not what the problem is. There's always something under it that's causing that dysregulation, whether it's a disrupted mitochondria, whether it is sometimes mold or other toxins in your body, heavy metals, whatever it may be, right? That is essentially what the root cause is causing this disruption to your hormones that then is showing up as something else. So what's incredible about what you're speaking about is getting to the root cause of everything, understanding what the baseline of your body is, what your body really needs, because this is a reaction to actually what's happening to you.
Yes. And in that reaction, what is your body doing? It's choosing survival.
Yeah.
It's protecting you every single time. But what we've been told is you're dysfunctional, you're broken, inherently because you are a woman, your periods are going to be horrible. You're going to need medications for life. Like, think about, like, this is something that I really it blows my mind that we have been sold this idea that just because we're women, we're not going to be able to make it through this life without a medication. Now, if you're taking a medication, I'm not judging you. What I am judging is all the marketing that we've been inundated with telling us that the only way for you to survive, to thrive, or to keep up with your male counterpart is to actually medicate away your cyclical hormones. And that is so bizarre to me.
It's also crazy. For example, there's another statistic that I found that 1 in 8 women will experience thyroid problems, and 80% of thyroid conditions are actually female related.
Yes. So thyroid disease predominantly affects women. And this is something I think is so important for women to understand, is that after age 35, you're going to be at higher risk. So what that means is, if you're 25 right now, could you please get a thyroid panel so that we can know when you feel your best, what does your thyroid look like? Because the reference ranges in the labs that we get are based on people who go to the lab. Who do doctors send to the lab? They send sick people to the lab and elderly people to the lab. And that doesn't match a 35-year-old's experience. So I'm always interested in what is your normal? What is your baseline when you feel your best? But these are markers that we should be tracking, especially as we enter into what can be the perimenopause window. It is acceptable to go through menopause at age 45. No sooner. No sooner. If you are going through, you're like, I've been through menopause at age 40, we need to work that up. That is not an acceptable age to just call it menopause and not work you up. Perimenopause can start a decade ahead of time. And with these, it almost feels like a complete roller coaster of hormones. But with these changes of hormones, we can see that thyroid conditions become more pronounced. Now, where does this originate for many women in the United States? Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, an autoimmune thyroid condition. Now, autoimmune disease predominantly affects women. These antibodies will show up before the thyroid symptoms that drive you to your doctor will show up before you have any major lab changes. These antibodies are TPO and thyroid antibodies. I like to run these annually on patients. I also have Hashimoto's, so I run these annually on myself, or if something comes up. If I know that I had a mold exposure from being somewhere, if I know that I had something really stressful, I need to check in on my immune system. So these antibodies, they will come up first. This is often when a doctor says, oh yeah, don't worry about it because the rest of your thyroid is fine. Well, what are these antibodies doing? They're basically flagging your thyroid. So I'm pointing to the front of my neck because that's where your thyroid lives. It flags it. And it's like, yoo-hoo, immune system, come cut this down, break it down. This is our problematic tissue here. So in a perfect system, okay, there should be happening all the time, anytime there's foreign invaders. In an autoimmune system, which I'm not saying it's an imperfect, you're imperfect because you have this, but there's a disruption in your immune health. It flags your tissue, healthy tissue, for destruction. So we see first antibodies. Then we start to see the patient being like, something's off, something's not right, but your thyroid labs are normal. Because maybe your doctor's just not measuring a TSH. That's what the brain says to the thyroid. It's thyroid stimulating hormone. So it can take a very long time for enough tissue to be destroyed before you actually see those changes in TSH. This is where it's helpful to also measure free T4. That's what your thyroid produces. And also free T3, which is your active thyroid hormone. T4 has to be converted into T3. And if we have inflammation taking place, sometimes what we're seeing early on is we can't make that conversion as well. Sometimes as well, being exposed to things like flame retardants, high amounts of chlorine. So chlorine, bromine, iodine, these are all halogens. Iodine's needed for your thyroid, but these halogens, they can disrupt your thyroid hormone as well. And so I want people to understand that TSH, free T4, free T3, TPO, and thyroglobulin antibody are what we want to have on these lab panels and what we want to be tracking. Because if I see antibodies, but your thyroid function looks fine, I'm like, amazing. Let's go get rid of this. Let's try to reverse this. Once you're autoimmune, I want people to also understand this. You are forever autoimmune. You forever will have the propensity to attack yourself, which is why if we can go and we can reverse that and we can get those antibodies into remission, we stand a better chance to, one, keep your thyroid healthy and functioning, but two, prevent other autoimmune conditions. There is some research studies that have cited that by the time the average individual gets the diagnosis of autoimmunity, they already have 2 to 3 autoimmune conditions present. Because when you lose tolerance to yourself, that's it. You will always have that propensity to be intolerable to your own tissue. So we want to catch that early and work on it.
Obviously, you all know I'm a biohacking fanatic and I absolutely love peptides. So you can only understand how excited I was when I discovered a skincare brand that works, that uses peptides. That is OneSkin. OneSkin uses the amazing OS1 peptide. OS1 works by actually switching off the senescent cells that drive the aging of your skin. Scientifically proven to give you biologically younger skin with long-lasting improvements in firmness, elasticity, reduction of fine lines and wrinkles, and a more youthful complexion. You can learn more about the OS1 peptide at oneskin.co and use my code Biohack-it for 15% off your purchase. It's crazy, right? Because there's all this stuff that kind of goes on before you actually reach that point, but we're not told about things like environmental toxin load. We're not told about vitamin and mineral deficiencies that a lot of us tend to have. We're not talking about the role of stress as actively unless people follow you or somebody like you to understand what that does to your women's hormones and does to your thyroid and how it can cause autoimmunity eventually. So I think people are missing this kind of like key piece and tying that all kind of back together versus getting a kind of a Band-Aid solution to things. You brought up Hashimoto's and that you have Hashimoto's. What is your personal treatment been for Hashimoto's? Because again, Hashimoto's has become very, very common and has also been on the rise and being diagnosed with it like PCOS.
Yes. So, the rise in diagnosis is a lot because, well, firstly, everybody who's listening right now, can I just thank you? This is why. This is why we're seeing more of these diagnoses, because we've known for a long time that there is a huge gap in women actually getting heard, not getting gaslit, and actually getting the diagnosis that they need. And it is very much through the power of women sharing their story and sharing what's possible and sharing how they advocated for themselves and figured things out, that women are now demanding better in healthcare in a way that is, it's shaking up the major media. Even
Yes.
Washington Post came out and was like, women are ditching birth control because of misinformation.
Yep.
And I'm like, is it misinformation, or is it for the first time in history we have a global connection, and when our doctors are gaslighting us and being like, no, this couldn't be true for you, but then you meet 10,000 other women in a community who are like, this is true for me, you're not alone and you won't just be gaslit. So I just really want to shout out to every woman out there making change. Wherever you're sharing your story, you're creating the change. It's not me. It's not doctors like me who are able to create this change. It is truly the patient who's going in and demanding better and educating their providers in some instances. So when it comes to Hashimoto's, I was diagnosed after the birth of my first son. I developed postpartum thyroiditis. I was told I was just a mom and I was tired, and that's just the way it is. And then lo and behold, after I gained so much weight and I was so depressed and I was crying all the time and falling asleep everywhere, and my husband said all the symptoms back to me one morning at the breakfast table, and I was like, wait a minute. This is Hashimoto's. This is hypothyroidism. I want people to understand this is why you work with a healthcare practitioner, because when you are in it with your symptoms, it's like reading it's like a book that's too close to your face. You can't read the words, but God, it's all there. All the answers are right there, but you need someone who can stand back and really look at that whole picture for you. So I say that because I think sometimes there's a propensity for people to feel like they're a failure because they have been doing all the things and trying all the things, and they're like, why can't I get better? And it's because you might be too close to it. It's why, there's the saying, and I'm paraphrasing, but the doctor who basically doctors himself has a fool for a patient, because you need the objectivity in somebody to look at you just as a whole picture instead of just
Correct.
being in it. So I will share what has helped my Hashimoto's. So I put my antibodies in remission, and once I did, I haven't had antibodies come back again until the birth of my second son. So very common time for us to see the triggering of autoimmune conditions: miscarriages, birth, perimenopause, menopause, on and off the pill, getting your period for the first time. All of these are changes in our hormones. Our hormones are very, very intimate with our immune system. So you can't separate them. They're besties, okay? And it's also why women are at higher risk. One of the ideas of why we're at higher risk, the theory is that because estrogen really helps make a robust immune system, and the ebbs and flows that we experience in life can be triggering events for autoimmunity. How do we develop autoimmunity? Well, the 3 ingredients to bake in that cake: triggering event, intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut, and having the genetics. And you can have all the genetics all day, every day, and never develop autoimmunity. I want you to understand that. But if you've got intestinal hyperpermeability and you've got that triggering event, you may just go there. So for myself personally, and what I do work on with all patients, is gut health. The seat of your immune system is there. If one of the ways that you're going to trigger autoimmunity is that there is intestinal hyperpermeability, so that is the tight junction in your cells, they're open up. Particles are getting through. Little immune cells are surveying those, and they get all hot and bothered because big proteins should not make it through. Not all these bacteria, not all of these yeast, not all of these organisms that are there that should just be making their way through. And we've got to tighten that up. But is that right away? This is where people are like, drink bone broth, have glutamine, do all of these things. You need to actually look at what is causing that. So back to the NSAIDs, if for a week out of every month you are popping multiple ibuprofen, you're going to affect your intestines. If you are taking the birth control pill, this can be a reason that you have intestinal hyperpermeability for some people. If you are drinking a lot of alcohol, if you are very, very stressed, like what am I illustrating here? There's a lot of ways that you could be causing these symptoms in yourself. It can also happen following like a head injury. So this is why it's important to work with a provider and identify these things and not chase everything. But then we definitely do want to look at the gut and look at, are there any infections going on? If you've got infections, we've got to clear those. There are certain things that are associated with developing autoimmune diseases, certain organisms. We have to look at that. But by far and away, when you look at someone's gut, and what we got now, we got stool cultures. They're really not like the best way for us to actually completely comprehend the microbiome at this point. But what you will mostly see is dysbiosis in people. And dysbiosis is the imbalance of organisms. So you've got commensal flora. They belong there. They should be there. They're just getting out of control. And like if you got too many of those rowdy dudes in a bar, like they're going to start a bar fight. And that bar fight's going to be inflammatory. It's not going to be good. And so we have to make sure that we have that balance there. So something that I think too few people are focusing on is fiber. Right now, I think protein's having its like era. And I love this because everybody needs more protein. So when I was studying my master's in nutrition, it was sarcopenic obesity. So this is like a couple decades ago where I was like, everybody eat your branched chain amino acids and get a lot of protein in. So yes, that's true. But we also need the plants because we need fiber. And at minimum 25 grams of fiber a day. There are some people who say 30 grams and some people who say even more. We have to be careful if you are still cyclical. If you go high in fiber, you can actually start changing your hormones and dropping your estrogen and not feeling great with that. So we don't necessarily want to be like, 50 grams of fiber a day. And if you're only getting like 5 grams a day right now, you are not jumping to 25. You'll hate me. You'll be constipated. You'll stink out the whole room. Like your gut will change rapidly, that it won't be a fun transition. So you can start improving your gut by increasing by 5 grams of fiber every day. So if you're eating 5 now, go to 10. Do that every day for a week. The next week, now you're at 15 and work your way up to that 25. And you will start to shift the microbiome to feed the good guys that belong there who really are like the bouncers of the bar and keeping those commensal flora in check. It's also going to help with the estrobolome, how you actually get your estrogen out of your body and how you hold on to it sometimes if you need it. So that's going to make improvements in your gut health as well. We also know, and this is very important, that if you're over 35, okay, now you're staring down menopause. It's coming in the next decade or maybe 15 years. You want to train now for it. When estrogen declines, so does the microbiome diversity. And people who consume fiber have less incidences of belly fat. Now, why does this matter? This is always when people in the body positivity or community are like, don't body shame. And I'm like, I really need you to like buckle up and listen to me. Visceral adiposity will kill you. It is bad. When I talk belly fat, I'm not talking about like, you got a little bit of belly fat. I'm talking about you've got fat around your organs. I want people to understand this is the most dangerous belly fat. This is why I don't care about your BMI. I care about your waist to hip circumference. I care about your inflammatory markers. I care about your lipids. I care about all these other markers more than just the weight on the scale. That's the least interesting part of your metabolic health, because if you've got a booty and you've got thighs and that's where you pack it in, you are a lot safer than the person who gets belly fat. And who gets belly fat? Those with diabetes, those with PCOS, and those who are on that menopause journey losing their metabolic health. And that's what it's a sign of. And fiber is one of those ways to increase microbial diversity and to help with that visceral adiposity, to prevent visceral adiposity, and to keep yourself sensitized to insulin. So very, very important. We're talking autoimmunity, but like this should really be like, this is something that we all need to be doing, because blood sugar regulation, if you're not keeping tight control on your blood sugar, forget it. Your immune system's, it's going to be pissed. It's not going to like you. Keeping a tight handle on your stress, That means going to bed at a reasonable time, getting good rest, making sure that you are exercising in a way that matches the needs of your body. I think this is sometimes where like biohackers and athletes, man, their brain, their focus, the way they work, amazing. But especially when you live in a cyclical body, pushing harder and trying to push through isn't always the best way forward. Sometimes resting, taking a different kind of exercise, maybe you're doing a cold plunge and you do it for less time. Like you modify things for your own body instead of being like, oh, I know this is what the science says to get me the best, outcome. A lot of biohacking tools are actually stressors. Stress isn't always bad. Exercise is a stressor. If you want your muscles to grow, you're going to stress those muscles. You're going to put them under stress and then they are going to grow. However, if you've already got, let's say that you're somebody who's working night shifts and you're having a really hard time adjusting and you've got really poor sleep, circadian dysregulation. So your circadian rhythm is totally thrown off in this. Maybe you just lost your pet. You are having a hard time in your relationship. You have to stand back and ask yourself, like, is it in my best interest to be fasting right now? As an example, it's probably not. Because that's just adding additional stress. And this is where I'm very middle of the road of these things because fasting's not bad for women. Cold plunges are not bad for women. Saunas are not. I see people being like, saunas are bad for women. And I'm like, I don't know where you're coming from, but I just need you to go to Finland for a minute. Go to these places where they've been doing this for a long time and see their women and check their markers of health. No. But it's more of a question of like, is this the right time for it? When you are in an autoimmune flare, or you are currently diagnosed with autoimmunity, you are in that beginning phases of a healing journey. Yes, saunas are going to be helpful because of the detox, but you're not going to start at like 20 minutes. You're going to start more at like 5 or 10. You're going to take it slow. You're going to take everything much slower. And so one of the biggest parts of healing my autoimmunity is really humbling myself because I am an A-type personality. I want to push through everything. I just am like, I know that the saying sleep when you're dead is absolutely wrong. And I say to my patients like, well, you'll be dead sooner than later if that's the way you go. And yet like, I feel like it's that whole vibe that like got ingrained in me. And so really a big part of healing my autoimmunity and keeping it in check is recognizing that like you have to rest. Rest is absolutely essential. Just because like you are like, oh, I need to work out. So I have ADHD and I will not be able to focus unless I get a good workout in. But I might be in a part of my phase where it's like, okay, you're not going to lift weights that heavy or walk as far, but you're still going to move. You're still going to do things. So I want people to understand it's about negotiating what's going to make you optimal. Not what does the science say, not what, does this great biohacker do? What do I think I should do, right? Like, oh, I should get 10,000 steps a day. Oh, but you have rheumatoid arthritis and your joints are totally flared. Don't do that.
That's not a good idea.
Yeah. And so, and it's like, I could sit here and give all the protocols, but I think that is one of the biggest missing keys for people. And that certainly was one of the hardest parts for me is that you have to honor your body and you have to be in partnership, not pushing through when you are in a flare, but really taking the time to say, I'm still going to move. I'm still going to keep up the habits. I'm still going to do these things. However, I'm going to modify it to serve my highest self.
Absolutely. And I think that's such great information to treat yourself also as an individual versus part of just a larger group getting mashed into things. So what works for you, do what's right for you, and really educate yourself and do the research and also self-teach yourself to be like, where am I in what stage of my life that I can allow for this stress and what it's going to do to my body and what impact it's going to have long term.
Yes.
Dr. Jolene, this brings me kind of towards the end of our episode, and I think our listeners have learned so much incredible information, and I definitely need to get you on for a round 2 because I think you have so much amazing stuff to share, and I just think I've scratched the surface with you, so I'm excited. Thank you for doing this again.
Yeah, thank you so much for your great questions too. They're really thank you.
So one of the closing traditions I have on the podcast is I ask all my guests the same question because I want to hear the insight. So what is the one lesson or learning to date that has been the most impactful and carried with you throughout your journey?
Oh gosh. I feel like really recognizing that your normal is the only normal that matters. I think that so often we are comparing ourselves to other people and we are looking at, I'm someone that I'm looking at the research and I'm looking at all of these components, but really honoring that you know your body. Nobody else lives in it. You know it better than anyone else. And anytime you go to a medical provider or really anyone and they tell you that's just normal or there's any of the gaslighting that begins, I want you to stop and remember that you are the only person who knows your normal and you owe it to your body to advocate for yourself.
That's a great, great lesson. Thank you so much. That's so valuable for people to walk away with and know that listen to your intuition, fall into your body. Don't just look at the outside world for answers, look within. So thank you so much for that. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation. And thank you again, Dr. Jolene, for doing this. And this episode's actually launching tomorrow. So I'm super excited. And tune in, everybody.